Hey all, Blake here with another video, and today I'm going to show you how to culture vinegar eels. Vinegar eels are a super simple first food for those tiny fry such as rainbowfish, tetras, danios and lots of other fish. So let's jump straight into the video. So I really love vinegar eels because it's one of the easiest live food cultures you can get. Also, it's imperative if you want to hatch out some of those really small fish, and as you guys may or may not know, I quite like to breed things such as CPDs and emerald rasborias that are going to require these as their first food. The good thing is that once you have a culture going, you can keep backup cultures out of the way in the back of a cupboard. Doesn't even need light or heat or anything. You can keep them there for upwards of a year. Another great aspect of vinegar eels is that unlike other worms such as microworms, vinegar eels are going to stay at the top of the water column. So they're going to be up where your baby fry are. So especially rainbow fish, it's really helpful, and it'll go a long way to making sure that your water remains clean because the food is in the area of the newborn fry. So to get started, you're just going to need a few things. We do require a bit of a starter culture, but the good thing is that because they're very low demanding, it's easy to ship and plenty of people have them. So make sure you reach out to any fellow hobbyists, look out on Facebook groups or anything like that, go to your local clubs, and you're bound to find somebody with some vinegar eels who can just pour some out into a little container for you, and instantly you'll have a starter culture. Once you have your starter culture, all that's left is you're going to want a glass bottle, ideally with a long neck. We'll discuss that a bit later. An apple. I've got just an apple tree in my backyard here, so I'm going to use one from the backyard, but it doesn't matter. Red or green apples is fine. They're not real choosy. You're going to need some apple cider vinegar. I buy this stuff in bulk here, so I think that's a 2 litre or a half gallon of apple cider vinegar. I like to do it a bit of a different way than other ways you might have seen on YouTube, where I like to use a long piece of styrofoam, some coarse sponge, and then some fine filter floss. You'll see how this will come together in just a moment. So when it comes to feeding vinegar eels, you really want 2 vessels. One, we'll say with their sort of mother culture here, and that is my 2 litre, in which we'll just place our starter culture in there and we'll chop up our apple. And the reason is the starter culture obviously contains the first few worms, and the apple is going to be their food source. So whilst they do live within the apple cider vinegar, that acidic environment, they do need something to eat and help to maintain the colony. That's where the apple comes in. It will degrade and become mushy, but all you need to do is keep topping it up with fresh apple and you'll be totally fine. You don't need to do any vinegar changes or anything on it. I just leave it exactly like that. And that one's been in the back of my cupboard for 6 to 8 months now. The thing is, we can't just get a turkey baster, turkey baste out some of that vinegar and put it into our aquariums, because it's going to do all sorts of things to our pH and just, be really poor for our water quality. So the next thing we need to do is create our basically feeding vessel, and that's where we come into having these glass bottles here. So as you can see, I do have this beer bottle here that I've used in previous, but today we're going to use this larger sort of actually I think it was a spring water bottle. So the way that these bottles work and the way it's going to feed out is we're going to fill up our culture to the base of the neck, and then we're going to put fresh tank water in the top section. And the good thing about vinegar eels is that they're going to want to swim up through our sponge into that fresh water to breathe from the surface, and at that point they'll get trapped up there. So that's when we can take our turkey baster and feed out of this culture. So to replicate that and to build upon what I've learnt in previous, I'm going to start off by just pouring some of this culture into the bottle. Now I'm just going to put a few pieces of apple in there just to give them some food whilst we do feed out of this culture. Doesn't have to be too much, but just something to keep them going. You can leave the skin on or take it off, it's up to you. So I'll just put some smaller pieces in the bottle. Okay, so once we've got the apple and the culture in our main feeding bottle that we're going to use daily to feed our little baby fish, a lot of people on YouTube will just say place some filter floss in the top, but I find to get it to stay in place, it has to be really dense, and I'd rather it not be so dense so that more worms can actually swim through it. So for this reason, this is where the styrofoam comes in. I like to put a long strip so that when it falls into the vinegar, it will tip on the side and help keep it, our barrier buoyant. And that is going to be our foundation to hold up our sponge and our fine filter floss. Now, similarly, I just like to use the coarse sponge because it's a lot more rigid than just fine filter floss on its own. So I'm just going to sort of scrunch it up, and I have cut a circle roughly to the diameter of the bottle that I'm going to use. So it should go down without coming back up above the neck. And then I'm just going to place our filter sponge in the top there. And the whole reason for this is not really anything technical. It's just so that we can pour our aquarium water in the top without it sort of mixing in with the vinegar. You just want something that's going to be a bit of a bed so that we can get that separation between the water and the vinegar. So now I'm just going to use this turkey baster to get some aquarium water. You could also use dechlorinated tap water if you wish. And I'll just pour it directly through our filter floss. As you can see, we've got the golden color vinegar down the bottom, our layers of separation there, and then some nice clear aquarium water at the top. And within basically 1 to 2 hours, we'll start to notice this clear water will be full of little tiny worms, and that's what we're going to feed to our newborn fish. Now you might be wondering, why would I make the switch from essentially the same thing of this bottle here versus this larger bottle? Well, it's really just dependent on how much you want to feed out of it. I would just find that this bottle here, I'd have to replace it so often, especially when I've got a lot of fry hatching out, and especially if I have multiple batches of fry hatching out, because when you think about it, if I refilled it at the end of the day, once I did my feeding, and then I go to feed 2 or 3 batches of fry, well, I really only get to the bottom of the filter floss worth of vinegar eels to feed out. Whereas this bottle here, I'm going to obviously be allowed to feed out a lot more. In terms of this feeding bottle, it'll just need replacing once you start to notice the quantity of worms in the top section start to diminish. So you'll start to notice, the first 2-3 feedings, the water will be very cloudy with all the little worms. And it'll just slow down, at which point, depending on how resourceful I want to be, I'll either pour the water out and then pour this culture back into the main culture, mix it all up a bit, and then pour it back into there. Or you can just dispose of it at that point as well. So if you've only got one or two tanks and you're only hatching out 1 or 2 batches of rainbowfish or tetras or whatever it is, well, you probably get away with just a ordinary beer bottle or soft drink bottle. But if you have a bit of a bigger setup, then I definitely recommend going for the larger wine bottle size cup. Now, a few other things about storing our backup cultures here. Don't put the lid fully on tight. I just leave it just loose like that. Another option could be to put some filter floss over the top and rubber band it, just so that there can be some air exchange without pests and bugs getting into it. I also think it's a good idea to keep multiple backup cultures, because why not? So I have 3 or 4 different cultures, and as I did state, they've all been sitting in the dark for months and they're still chock full of little microscopic worms. You can see them with the naked eye, but you won't be able to pick them up on camera. The worms will survive within the aquarium water for about 48 hours, 24 to 48 hours. The other thing I'd suggest is, if you don't have any eggs that are about to hatch, then just don't put this aquarium water in the top, because they can live within the vinegar, but once they swim up into that aquarium water, they will eventually pass away after a couple of days. So for example, if I just left it exactly how it is here on the table, within sort of a week or so, they'd start to die off and you'd notice the water get really milky, sort of gross, and you wouldn't want to be feeding that to your fry at all. They're going to keep your newborn fry nice and well fed. They're not going to foul up your water really quickly. Super easy culture to maintain. I definitely recommend it, and you'll see far better results raising up your fry if you do. So there you go, guys. That is how to culture vinegar eels. Hopefully you liked this video. If you did, it always helps me out to smash like, hit subscribe, and all that fun stuff. And I'll catch you on the next one. Thanks for watching.